All right, welcome everybody. And can't believe I'm about to say this, but we are in December of 2024, and it's hard to believe, but we have just a few days left to bring home the bacon, right, Gar, for this year. But for years, when I worked for you, Gary, the 2020, well, whatever it was, right? That 2019, 2016, whatever the year was, the business planning workshop webinar we used to do at True Methods, it was huge. I mean, the amount of people that would show up, both partners and, just anybody could show up to it. And so,
Yeah, that was the biggest webinar of the year.
yeah, it was really cool. And so I wanted everybody in the cyber call to experience it all. How many shopping days left? That's the most important thing. Very funny. Good to see Eric. Good to see everybody. Hope you guys can all hear and see us okay. Let me know if you can. And just setting the stage. Last week, I thought was great where we had Phyllis. We talked about CIS reasonableness, and I think it's really cool how you guys are kind of setting a bar, or saying, you have states and federal agencies saying, well, it should be reasonable, but it's not defined. So you guys are kind of putting a line in the sand saying what reasonable should look like, which is awesome. And then we spoke with Lawrence Cruciana, the CEO of Corp Infotech, who's adopted the controls, one of the first MSPs to do it many, many years ago, but the first to go through the accreditation process. We're going to have some exciting stuff to talk about, Phyllis, probably in the next week or so, about something we're doing at Right of Boom with you and Kurt and John Strand post-event, which will be very limited, but we will let people know about what they can do to see you guys and get involved with that. So this week, with only a few weeks left in 2024, I really wanted to dedicate this to business planning. And I thought it was apropos that we have Gary as our not only our co-host, but our guest to do that. And so, Gary, this is something that, I'm just curious before I hand over to Phyllis, has it changed? Like, whether it happens to be factors of scale with PE, AI, automation, are there still the fundamentals, or aside from that, has how you look at business planning changed in this era?
No, the only thing that happens, Andrew, is as you scale, you need to get better at it. So you never get an A unless your business, doesn't grow. You need more knowledge, right? And if it doesn't grow, you probably get a D. So it is like, in my experience, and I've been in a lot of different situations, right? Running a lot of different orgs, from 2 MSPs to this, now involved with, Kaseya and startups, like many different situations. And it all starts with what we're going to talk about today. Like this, to me, is my favorite topic, because this is the foundation of how, as an entrepreneur, you make your dreams and your team's dreams come true and get the life that you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Just out of curiosity, though, are the stakes bigger these days? Like, in other words, if you miss, with scale, are the misses that much more exponential because of scale?
So what I see, I'll say two things. At scale, what I see is companies get stuck, is really what happens when they have a lack of discipline around this. And I'm seeing it happen, like some scaled companies that are stuck. If you are an average size MSP, there's more risk than just getting stuck. And we're going to talk about some of those reasons why today. Like, there's a few fundamental things that are different. And when we get to the very end, I'll call out the biggest change I've seen in 30 years.
Okay. Very cool. Phyllis,
that's what's called a teaser. For those of you that aren't in the biz.
Okay. Fair enough. Thanks for that marketing hype. All right, Phyllis.
All right. Thanks. So, Gary, As we approach 2025, what do you think is the biggest challenge that MSPs will be facing in the next few years, and how should they start planning now to address it?
Yeah, so this will be the topic of all the questions today, but the way that I would sum it up is the landscape is changing more rapidly today and in more areas than any time that I've been in this business. So the technology landscape, digital revolution, AI, security, automation, compliance, regulation, like there's so many things now that are changing, and each of them are changing more quickly that, I mean, if you don't have the foundation on how to run your business, I feel like it's more of an issue now. Do you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
in the past, Phyllis, it was just like, okay, you weren't optimizing, but I think there's much more of a risk now than to just not optimizing, and you don't have a choice but to change, I believe.
Gary, so Phyllis, just a quick question. Gary, all the things you listed, I mean, we talk about them week in and week out, but it kind of like snapped me there for like when we started like meeting and, becoming friends in the 204, 205, 206, that time frame, like MSPs didn't, all they had to worry about is good service. And it's when, tools like Kaseya and ConnectWise came into fold and there was some automation, but by and large, none of the things you just mentioned were even in the MSP's
Yeah,
purview.
you could stay break and fix and use the tools and still run your business and still make your customers happy. And others like me, we transformed our business and got a level of scale. But it was like that was our benefit. But the other people had a time period of lagging behind where they could still run their business even a little bit better than they did before the tools, right?
Mhm.
This transition's not exactly like that.
Got
It's and we're going to talk through it today. They're going to be affected more by what's happening, right? And so, um, yeah. So I think the opportunity is bigger, but like the stakes are higher too. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
and I liked how you put regulation in there too. We at CIS are also doing our 2025 planning, and we talk about who are our main customers, blah blah blah. And I always say, it's organizations that want to show compliance to a regulatory framework is high, high, high on the list because no one ever wants to implement cybersecurity to be quote unquote more secure, right? It's because there's some lever, some auditor is going to come, and there's like this forcing function.
I,
Um,
I agree. I agree with that. The caveat I'll put is I think when you're good at standards and alignment and you're good at packaging and pricing and value prop,
mhm,
that you can lead non-regulated people to view things and risk in the same way. It's just more work. It's
mhm,
easier when a third party creates that. So I'm
mhm.
gonna. So I agree with you, but I'm gonna extend it to say I've watched people. A lot of people
Well,
do it. We've had a lot of them on here.
you're right. You're right. I accept your correction and your addition because you're right. Like, we always talk about also, you know, um, explaining cyber risk to the business, and you really have to do that business impact analysis. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So you also, when we talked about planning, so with your vast experience, what do you think the most common mistakes that MSPs make when they try to create or when they are creating their long-term business strategies?
Yeah.
And as we look to 2025, how can MSPs avoid making those mistakes?
Okay. This goes to the heart, right, of what we're talking about today. And I've been thinking about this for the last week because we're doing what's called an office hours for our peer members, and this is the topic. And I always try to give them a different look because they have content. They can go watch a bunch of videos on life and business planning. But when I developed the process, I developed what I call life and business planning, not just business planning. You can get operationally a business plan like good places like EOS and scaling up. But for the people that I teach, life is the big part because it starts with if you're an entrepreneurial business, as an owner of a business, it starts with your life goals, your long term financial goals, and really spending time because, Phyllis, that's what connects what you need to do to where you're going. You put on there, like, what life events do I have to pay for? I want to send my kids to college. I want a vacation home someday. I want to take care of an elderly parents, like really meaningful things. And if you do that, you won't go a quarter without closing a deal. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because it's not just a business plan now, it is your life. So step one is to start with that, right? Because time and money are the same side, or different sides of the same coin. And then the second piece, so that's your why. You have to start with your why, and people skip over that. And then the second piece is now you got to translate it to your team. And that's where purpose, vision, core values, culture, all of those things, that's their why. So as entrepreneurs in an entrepreneurial business, we start with our why. Then we have to get our team to understand what their why is. Now you can go to having a full plan, which is go to market, ops, people, R&D, which I'm going to talk about more, and the financial plan that ties it all together. And the way that process works is long-term planning, 5 to 10 years, a 3-year target, which is really important. Like the mentality around a 3-year target is far enough away that you can make some mistakes and still be able to get there, but not so far away that you can't plan and be pretty specific about where you want to be. Then a 1-year plan. And then the most important thing is your quarterly action plan, what you're going to execute on, both goals as well as activities. That's the things that you can control. So the rocks are the things that you can control, or those quarterly activities. And then the goals match up to those. And then at that point, you go in 13-week segments each quarter, executing, looking at where you are, and you're always in the first year of a 3-year plan. And that's pretty much how it goes. And so the biggest mistakes people make is, one, they don't really do a business plan the way that I just described it. They do a budget. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like a budget is like what you already know you're going to do. And a plan is, if you're doing your plan right, you're not always 100% a plan. Like you're putting it, you're not 50%, right, but you're always reaching just a little higher than what it's higher than what a budget would be. And that's what pushes you. And I believe that's what spurs us, on the greatness. But all those pieces, if you don't put the whys in, those 2 whys in first, and then the complete plan, that's how you make this chocolate cake.
Gary, what about, I'm glad you talked about stretching. What are your thoughts on, leadership and doing things that are uncomfortable, showing that in leadership that, you're willing to do things that put you out of your comfort zone, because I believe that's what it takes to be awesome.
Yeah. And there's 2 pieces to that, Andrew. One piece is, as a leader, thinking about, hey, here's where I want my business to be in a year or 2. What does that role look like? And what do I need to stop doing? And what do I need to start doing? And sometimes what you need to start doing isn't something that maybe you have the entire skill set today. That's to me what getting out of your comfort zone is. And then the other thing is dealing with uncomfortable scenarios first. Whether it's with a customer, with an employee, with a vendor, people tend, as leaders, they run away from conflict. For whatever reason, I love it. I know that everyone is not that way, but I also think it's why I have, Andrew, I have a lot of really close relationships with people. And I think that's the reason why. And that's one of the qualities. If you can teach yourself, and I believe it's a learned skill, to do those 2 things, deal with uncomfortable situations and put yourself out of your comfort zone, that's what makes, I look back on my career, that's what's made it so fun and allowed me to do things I never thought I would be able to do. And I wasn't qualified to do.
Yeah. I remember you always said in our business planning sessions, you'd come out and say, I'm not qualified right now to lead the business. I will in a year from now, but in a year from now, I will be.
100%. That's the way it should work. You shouldn't be completely qualified to run the business you'll have in a year, but you have a year to get there. But you got to have a pretty good plan, and you have to include in it your specific role, how your role is going to change. And then once you do that, you can start thinking about your team, how their roles need to change. And as you scale, that's really why people get stuck. They stop that process because it starts to go a couple levels down. where you need people to change and be in different roles and get skill sets. And if you're not showing them that and helping them get there, that's why you get to some level of either employees or customers or tickets or revenue. And we've seen them, Andrew, get stuck for 15 years, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Eric real quick because you mentioned conflict. Eric deals with conflict literally on an hourly basis. Eric, for human nature, I don't think a lot of people are comfortable with conflict.
Yeah.
You live in it, you breathe in it, and you're very comfortable with it. What any advice, one or two pieces of advice you'd give people to get out of their comfort zone and embrace conflict and how to do it?
I mean, I'll tell you that personally, even though I deal with it every day, many times a day, historically, I've been a very conflict averse person, right? I would do everything I can to avoid conflict. And so part of learning to, and like Gary said, everything's a learning opportunity, right? Part of learning to deal with conflict was looking within yourself and knowing that, well, shoot, I do things that avoid conflict all the time, right? So, but that's my job, right? My coaching to my clients is, let's do all of this stuff to avoid conflict in the future, right? So part of it's good, but there's nothing you can do, as you know, to avoid every bit of conflict, and then unfortunately it does come up. But knowing your strengths and knowing your weaknesses, and I don't litigate, for example, because litigation is even more conflict than the transactional work that I do today, and it's because I know my skill sets, right? And that just isn't one of them.
And part of it is, Andrew, knowing how to do it, like knowing how to have hard conversations. Like there's a process to it. It's framing it, making sure it's not personal, being direct, cleaning up after yourself. There's a process by which you do it. And the person may not like the message. The customer may not like the message, being delivered. Like when I had my first MSP, nobody wanted to call the customer that was way behind on their AR. And I'd love to make that call. Okay, dude, I didn't give you the price for us to be your bank. Like what should I do? Like, what would you do if this was one of your top customers? And by the way, what if you have an issue? Do you think, do you want us to be running there? Like, can we talk this through? And then many times that was the change in relationship where we became peers.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, but not disrespectful,
Right. I mean, I think, we manage communities. I've managed communities. Everyone has their pet project, and you have to be able to take a step back and say, this is why what you suggested didn't make it to the document, or this is why we cut this. And I think what Gary said in the beginning was critical, is if you know your why. We call them guiding principles. You have your guiding principles. You can point to your North Star. You've got your vision. This is why you're going to do it. This is why your employees should be able to do it. And when you have to have those sessions, you should be able to point back to those.
Yes.
And have that unbiased conversation and say, hey, this is why we're doing this. And this is why you need to step up, or this is why we're changing this way. And this is why we're going to go this direction, because we all agreed at the beginning of the year, these are our goals. And this is why we're doing this. I think that's so critical. And that really helps you when you have those uncomfortable situations, because then you can point to your North Star.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and I just want to push up on one thing Gary said earlier, but you mentioned culture, right? And not enough MSPs, I think, focus on the culture of their company, because you can do all the planning in the world and you can do all the processes in the world, but culture trumps that every single time. And if you don't have a solid culture, then it doesn't matter what else you do.
But there's one key thing I'll add to that. I see people like in our peer meetings who didn't have a great sales quarter. They give themselves a C in profitability and an A in culture. And what I tell them is, you think culture is your employees are happy. By definition, a good culture is a high performing culture. And if you're not high performing, it's not a great culture by definition.
Yeah.
And so both are true, Eric.
Yeah, totally agree.
That's awesome. So earlier, when we talked about, things MSPs should think about, you talked about tech like AI, automation, cybersecurity, and advancements that impact MSPs, and will be impacting MSPs in 2025 and further. So how should MSPs adapt their services, taking these things into consideration?
Well, again, let's start with the foundation of this, which is you have to understand what an innovation cycle looks like, right? You need to clearly see how your customers' needs have changed and then be building offerings that meet those needs before someone else does. Like that's with every one of those things we talked about, that's what has to happen. And, we're going to talk more about customer relationship a little bit later, but all the answers lie with your customers. They don't lie with your employees and they don't lie with your vendors. So you have to make sure that you're talking to the right people to understand what to do in each of those areas. Then you have to know what innovation looks like. And I'll talk more about it in a few minutes. I'll talk about how I look at the innovation cycle as we dive deeper into it. Are you with me on this?
Mhm.
Yes.
Good.
So my last question for you, looking at your career and how the MSP industry has evolved, what fundamental shifts do you predict will happen for MSPs and how they operate in 2025? And how should MSPs position themselves?
Okay. So, we benchmark now 750 by the end of the year, 800 MSPs around the world. So I'll pick one trend to lean into on this, which is the changing ratio between MRR, monthly recurring revenue, and NRR, non-recurring revenue. So NRR as a percentage of MRR is going down. Andrew, can you guess why?
You shared it a few times, but I'd love for everybody to hear it again, Gary.
Yeah, because some of what drove NRR in the past is refresh cycles. And we only move people to the cloud once. In 3 years, we're not replacing an Exchange server again like we did for decades. And so what that means is it's always been this way. In other words, what represents NRR or additional revenue outside your core MRR has always been changing, but it changed slow enough that we all kind of adapted together. Now, because this is happening much faster, we see people not adapting fast enough. And so this is a risk. We need to think about evolving our services, whether they're recurring or non-recurring. We have to replace that gross margin. Mm-hmm. Most MSPs, we have something we teach in our business planning process called it's like I'll use break even. I call it the turning point, but it's like your break even, where all of your recurring revenue covers all your costs except for like your hardware cost of goods sold. So every dollar of hardware margin and non-recurring services falls to the bottom line. Many MSPs, even that run at 12 to 15% true net profit, they're at or below that break even, which means that non-recurring revenue is their profit. And if it's starting to diminish, like that's an issue. And you need to see that trend and you need to be able to plan to A, what can I do to slow it down, right? And then B, what am I going to replace it with, whether it's non-recurring or recurring services? And, they're going to fall into the categories that we've talked about and we'll talk about a little bit more. But I think that means having command over your business and, operating like a mature business so that you can do this type of analysis and think about it ahead of time, not after the last 2 quarters sucked and you realize that part of the business is not coming back the way it was, which I see happening right now. So to me, I mentioned that one of all the other trends because like it's immediate. It affects this year's, this month's, this quarter's net profit.
Gary, Eric's son, he kind of rhetorically put this in, but he also had the questions like, okay, we got the, a business plan, but he was kind of also asking about like, what are the tactical things? What are the steps? Do you have an example or two, maybe like, hey, I have my 5 to 10 year plan, my 3 year, my 1 year, my rock. Okay. The rock's probably where you get a little more tactical, right? For that quarterly.
Yeah. So not all, but most of your quarterly rocks should tie back, or a percentage of them should tie back to your annual plan. Right. And so let's just say that, hey, we want to roll out, IG1 standards and review it with every customer this year. Well, maybe in quarter 1, you have 50 customers. I'm going to take 6 customers and I'm going to fully run through these steps and review it with results with the customer. That might be it. And then next quarter, hey, we figured it out now. We're going to go and do the next 20 customers. And that's a good example because sometimes people say, oh, we should be doing this standard for all of our customers. And they're like, oh, let's go do it for every customer this quarter. Like, well, no, you're not. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, but that's a good way of saying, like, instead of setting yourself up for failure in every one of these, and if you take that example that I just gave, most things in all areas of the business are just like that. Identify it. What does success look like in the end result? What are the steps to get there? How can I break it down into something this quarter that gives us projects, helps us learn whatever that is, improving your support desk, fixing project management, onboarding, sales process. It doesn't really matter what it is. Any part of the plan, tactically, that's how you would approach it. That's what successful businesses do.
That's interesting. It's because you've talked about, when people roll out a new offering and they have to figure out, their hard cogs or service cogs. You always talk about it's going to take them about 5, 6, 7 tries, some unprofitable in there though, before they get everything tuned in, what roles, processes go along with it. Is that the kind of the mindset?
Yeah, you're applying it to what I would call the innovation cycle, and I'm going to review that in detail in a couple minutes.
Okay.
But the concept is the same. I'm saying for changing, like fixing any existing thing, improving anything in the business, which is really you're adding something or improving something, right, in your business. And so every one of them has to be broken down to both goals and activities, taken down into achievable pieces quarter by quarter. And I would rather do 6 customers there, fix 25% of what I have going on in support desk, and like make progress in all these areas instead of like saying I'm going to completely do one thing that's not going to really happen.
Yeah, makes sense.
I have a question, Gary, as a non-business person. When you talk about like the NRR and the MRR, I get what you're saying, but part of it is, should a business also look inward to say, I can use automation to save costs, to save money on process, and as well as like looking towards more revenue kind of external?
Yeah, you should be doing both.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have to be because everyone's going to. So I was looking at a deal, like an M&A deal. And I said to the guy who ran the business at scale, I said, your gross margins are too low. Like they're below 40% on services. Like that's not good. He says, yeah, well, we're going to fix that with automation. And I'm like, well, I just saw a business that's at 50%. They told me the same thing. So I don't think you're going to catch up. So some things you do, right, to improve the business, but also something that is industry wide, right? Like automation. There's also, it's like, you're not going to close the fundamental gap between where your efficiency is and somewhere else and someone else who's more efficient. If they're doing those same things, probably better than you, since they're already more efficient, they're probably better at it.
Gary, before we turn, I think if you have one more, Phyllis, but David says, Gary used to say, expect 33 to 50% NRR of MRR. What percent of NRR, what percent of NRR of MRR are we seeing now as the benchmarking?
Okay, so it still varies, right? Because if you're a smaller MSP and you're selling a bunch of new customers and you have more onboarding fees, it's buffering it. So we tell people not only look at the percentage, but now we're asking our peer members to break it down so that you can see it by category so that you may be covering up some future sins. But we see it now, like companies at scale are down in that 20 to 25% range. And it falls below 20, it starts like, it changes the business model. Like fundamentally, you have to replace that gross margin.
Interesting.
And David, nice to hear from you, bud.
All right, over to you, Eric.
Thanks, Phyllis. So Gary, a long time ago, when I used to help run a MSP, we were able to scale very, very quickly, right? But it wasn't without bumps in the road occasionally. And one of those bumps in the road tended to be around service delivery and what ended up being deficiencies in service delivery, customer satisfaction, things like that. So can you speak a little bit to some strategies that MSP should be focusing on to both scale profitability, but do it without sacrificing service delivery?
Okay, so one thing I'll say is there's no perfect solution. What we don't want to do is get stuck, but I would rather you create issues and scale than go so slowly that everything's always perfect. Like, I would not be afraid to break some eggs. And I think most MSP owners are afraid to do that. They don't want to upset one client. They don't want any churn. And sometimes that fear can stand in the way where they don't make the progress, because some things you can't figure out without breaking a few eggs. Having said that, I feel like I see systems break down. You start off and everyone's in some clearly defined role. Everybody's in a delivery area. Then as you grow, you start throwing management and people overseeing it. And then when you step back and look at it, it's like your org chart is still not well defined. Whether you have 5 employees or 500, everybody should be in some defined role. There might be some additional management overhead as you go, but those fundamentals, what they do, how they're trained, the metrics that they're judged on need to stay the same. And usually when I talk to companies that are growing fast and leaking oil, that is what happened. They are losing. Even, look, even a company at the scale of Kaseya with 5,000 or 7,000, employees, it has to run the same way, which is when it gets down to an individual contributor, there has to be a certain structure in place that looks like success.
That's great feedback. Can we talk about partnerships for a minute? And how can
I add one more thing?
Yeah.
To that? I was thinking about it, like, also think about it from this standpoint. When you're leveling up security, moving on to compliance, developing your AI automation strategy. Again, I mentioned that innovation cycle. So from that standpoint, like identifying areas of innovation, that comes from the customer and the marketplace. Then you can't do them all. So you got to set some priorities. You got to do a basic feasibility study to see whether the timing is right, whether you're prepared, all of those things. Is the marketplace prepared? Then you have to test it and do it internally. You have to have a limited rollout. Then you got to figure out your packaging and pricing. And then you have to have a go-to-market plan. Like, all of those steps have to happen. And if you're growing by adding new things, Eric, without doing all those steps every time, that's the other thing that creates an issue other than operations, which is your revenue and your delivery no longer matches up.
Got it. So as we're planning for 2025, one of the things that we wanted to talk about was partnerships. So what can MSPs do to better leverage, generally speaking, alliances, whether that's with vendors or with other businesses or with partners or referral partners? How can MSPs leverage those alliances to enhance their offerings in the new year?
Well, from a let's talk go-to-market and then service delivery. From a go-to-market standpoint, I mean, I'm a huge fan of centers of influence, like developing partnerships in the marketplace that are symbiotic with people that are aligned in terms of what they're trying to do in their business and the way they're culturally, how they approach their customers in the marketplace. It is the best way to lower your CAC, your customer acquisition cost. And that's really important. So I think thinking more strategically about those, if you're in verticals, there's more opportunity for it, is really important. From the operational standpoint, I think it depends on your scale, right? And you got to be honest with yourself, be self-aware. What can you build and do? Like, you have to be able to do it better, faster, cheaper than if you had a partner to do that. And too many times people want to own everything. We've seen it in security, right? Instead of outsourcing it. And that may mean sometimes what it costs to outsource it. In the beginning, it might be an issue. Like we've seen that with most of the security tools, right? Where it took time for some of them to get to a reseller price that we could proliferate them out across, the entire base. So what I would say is when you look at that, understand the things you outsource, what's the benefit of it? What's the impact of, reselling it on your gross margin? And then look to bundle outsourced services wherever possible. That is one of your hedges, right? Against margin erosion. And then as they get more efficient, it helps your margins, not the other way around.
Got it. So let's talk a little bit about people, right? Because there's processes, there's tools, and then there's people. And a lot of MSPs struggle with talent acquisition, talent retention, et cetera. So in 2025, with a ridiculously competitive market, what are some of the keys to attracting and retaining top talent?
Well, the first thing is you have to have as part of your business plan a people plan. That means right now I'm force ranking all of my current team members, decided who should go. D players usually, right, are going to need to go. Who are C players that I can put on a plan for improvement and check them again next quarter? And who are the people I want to build around? And then based on that, and then based on my business plan, like where do I need to hire and when based on that plan? And I need to start now. Like when I ran my MSPs and True Methods, we were pretty much recruiting whether we need somebody or not all the time. We never stop recruiting, because if you lose somebody or need to add somebody and you're starting from scratch today, you're going to be putting yourself in a position to accept somebody you don't want to accept. You almost have to always have this virtual bench, and you have to have a process for this. Like you have to have such a defined process, just like the sales process, where you get people in, you evaluate them, you find out what's important, you know who they have to meet with, what test you give them. And then when you want them, you got to get them off the street, and you got to make sure that you're closing them on not looking for something else and making a commitment to you, like all those pieces. Then at the core of it is your culture. Whether you're a growing company, if you're not growing, it's really hard to attract top talent. Like no one wants to work for you and work for the same 30 customers that you've had for 7 years. Define roles, process, having automation so you can get A results from B people, offshoring resources. These are all the things, Eric, that you need to be thinking about in 2025.
That's great.
Eric, Gary, it's interesting. Both you and Eric are big in football, but it was making me think about college football, what you just said. And that, I'll talk to Eric sometimes, being a big Michigan alum and strong football team. And I'll be like, how is it that Michigan or Alabama, and it comes back to what you were saying before, people want to work for winning teams, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. They want to work. You can feel a thriving business. I know, because I started off with a business that when I got there was, stagnant, and we got it thriving, and you could feel it, right? From everyone that you talk to. And it's exciting, and people have hope, and they, you always heard me say, Andrew, we all want different things out of career and life, but there's one thing we all share. We want to know that what we do makes a difference, and we want to feel that we're a part of something that's bigger than just us.
Right.
And to do that, you have to be a profitable, growing company. You don't have to be the fastest or biggest company, but you got to be adding customers every quarter at the right price. And people have to see that, they can look back every year and say, look, things are better and there's opportunity here.
It reminds me, just one quick story. We've had Carl Bickmore on and SnapTech, Gary. And, they've worked hard, done really well over the years. And it's interesting, like you say, if you work hard and build really profitable business, you have opportunity. They embraced automation and spun out a very successful secondary business around Roost, where they have Raven Automation now. And I hear you say things, but then I think about where it applies, and you can see the MSPs that have been successful and how, and hopefully this is inspiring. It's not downtrodden to anybody out there. It's like they were able to they embraced automation, they were profitable, and they bet on themselves in, a secondary business that's very tangential to their core business.
Yeah, and not only that, think about the other side of it, which is Eric asked, like, where should be partnering? Hey, maybe you want to get ahead on automation, but you just don't have the scale or the skill sets right now. There's a great thing, like you can outsource it, like like what you just talked about. And so that example explains both sides of it, right?
Right.
Like what happens, and then how you can also partner on. That's a great example.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So Gary, what other strategies, speaking of automation, can MSPs invoke? Are there specific tools or specific systems that MSPs can use to streamline their operations and or improve efficiency?
Yeah. So here's how I look at it. Let's break it down into one piece is operational efficiency, which is, I think, the way MSPs think. They want to deliver service more efficiently, and that's fine. And to do that, you can use one of the platforms like Roost, or some MSPs are going to wait, like all the things you see Kaseya doing with 365 endpoint and user, and then like what's to come. They're focusing all of their automation around that. And so those customers, they'll have that handed to them, Eric. Do you know what I mean? Like it's built in, and they don't have to get up the innovation curve. They just get the end result of it. And that's important because you want to deliver consistent results. You want to level up your talent, right? But I think there's another piece to it, which is thinking about that one of the biggest opportunities, I believe, in the next 5 years is delivering automation to your customers, automation services to your customers. Like, I think this is going to be like probably the biggest revenue stream, like bigger than security was, for MSPs. And to do that, you can't just think about using automation to deliver your operations efficiently. You have to think about it, how to deliver your entire business process more efficiently. From sales and marketing to billing, like every aspect of the business, you have to have a culture of automation. And once you and your team sees it that way, and then you start to talk to those customers, you'll start to get pattern recognition about what things are common so that we can start bringing these services that could be $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a month because we're impacting major levers in their business. So I feel like this is really, and it's going to move much faster than security did, right? And security moved faster than anything had in the past. And I think we're just like 2025 is kind of like that turning point based on how I see the marketplace.
Awesome. Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Gary, I was going to ask you about, building strong cyber resilience, what companies need to do to stay ahead of the curve. But after I ask you that or maybe before I ask you that, is the reason automation going to be exponential is just mindset. Like customers see customers see security as, hey, I need to do it. I need to protect my business. I see risk. I see how it impacts my, from a BIA. Whereas if you really understand automation, you can have an impact on, oh, we lost Gary.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
I thought he taken what you said personally.
I think he did. I have a question for you all while he's waiting. When we talk about automation, do you think people worry about automation taking over their jobs? Oh, he's back.
Sorry, I don't know what happened. I must got an internet glitch.
No, you can ask Gary that because he's very involved with automation companies.
When you talk about automation and improving process, do you think that people feel threatened that automation will be taking over their job?
And I think you could supplement in there LLMs, right? AI, the same mindset, right, Phyllis?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I just had an experience yesterday where I had to return something, and it was an automated responder, virtual. It was better than a person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was awesome. They answered everything so quickly and accurately, and I got through the process. So I think in some industries, depending upon where you are, you should be afraid, honestly. Like, things are going to change. But in most, and I think like if I work, in technology at an MSP, I think it's more an opportunity. It's more about leveling up your skill set, doing more interesting things, being more valuable. Like, you should be able to touch more revenue and endpoints and be more valuable and get paid more because it can be more efficient. And so I would embrace it. And I don't think the way companies are growing is not about an MSP going from 50 employees to 40. It's about, going from, 7 million to 8 million with adding 5 employees instead of 15.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think,
Tim just said the same thing, right?
yeah, I
So
think,
all those rote kind of jobs should be automated so that your staff or your employees can do something more interesting.
which is, Gary, almost verbatim what we said 20 years ago when people started to go about RMM. Remember, like
Yeah.
RMMs, people freaked. They were like, literally, Phyllis, I wish we could go back in time 20 something years ago when the first RMMs were coming out. People were like, oh my God, I'm going to, if I'm not patching every machine, I'm not kidding you.
Right.
Gary, is that a true statement? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish it would have happened a little bit more and people had higher leverage.
But it's really funny how things change, but they don't change, fellas.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
The things, so Tim, I think, just nailed it. Tim Furnett in chat.
Yep.
Gary, I was asking about.
Yeah, hey, good job there, Timmy.
Yeah. What things MSPs need to do to evolve for side, because again, I still think there's a big upside for embracing CIS for cyber resilience, both internally and then, building it externally. So that's one question. But before you froze and left, I was going to ask you, because you said, automation is going to be exponentially bigger than security was. Is it because the perception from, whether perception or just reality, that automation can really have an impact on profitability? Whereas security, yes, it does if it prevents, a big, event, but where automation truly has direct impact on revenue, and business owners understand that much more than they do security.
They do. And it solves a lot of problems for them that we're not involved with yet as MSPs, and we need to be, which is they've had tools proliferation or app proliferation the same way that we have. They don't even know all the apps that they use and how they should be working together, if they're doing what it is, why they bought them. Security is one piece of it, but I think how you tie things together, and there's 2 main areas, right? Which is automation and AI and BI reporting. Like, they're the 2 big gaps. And if you think about it, Andrew, there is nobody else right now except for us to deliver that to an SMB. Now, enterprise companies, they have big consulting companies that bring it to them, and they spend tens of millions of dollars to get there.
Yeah.
That's not the model of an SMB or even a mid-market enterprise. And so if we don't do it, there will develop an industry who's not us that will do it, but we're already there. So our cost of sales, we have such competitive advantage against anyone trying to come into our turf because we own the customers. Like you've heard me many times tell the story of that one of the biggest businesses in the world was like ice harvesting, and the ice people didn't change, and all the customers had a lower cost of sales, but they didn't build refrigerators, and their industry was gone. Like, we're in that position. Like, Pete, they thought everyone will always need ice. We're thinking like everyone will always need us until they don't, right?
Yeah, really, really good point. And it is, to me, it is exciting, especially seeing some of the MSPs that are adopting it. And I personally know some of them, and I know the MRR, Gary, already that they're doing in some of these areas, and it's pretty amazing. So yeah, to me, it's really exciting as well. So I'm bullish on it.
The second part of your question about like, what do they need to do to stay ahead of the curve in 25, like more specifically, I'm going to recap our conversation that we had a few weeks ago with Tyler from Pace, which is 1, raise your minimum standard from a tool standpoint. And the examples that we use are on the endpoint. That means MDR everywhere, not on 40%. And on every user, it means things like, SaaS alerts, like cloud detect and respond everywhere. And then have all your standards across 100% of your customers. Think about a key security role when you're ready. Tyler mentioned that they hired someone, and that really was pivotal, who had not just knowledge, but had all their accountability was around the security posture and the culture. And it leveled up the entire, team. And then packaging and pricing for both profit and value. So if you kind of think of it by those four things, Andrew, that's how I would approach security in 25.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very good. And then Garrett, what about, verticals? Do you feel any differently? I knew you back owning your MSP days and things were, horizontal, right? You're across the board, but are verticals more important today? If so, why? Or you feel the same? It doesn't matter.
So I think if you only have one vertical, you better make sure it has the right characteristics, right?
Mm.
Which means how it's impacted by their technology changes, how it's impacted by macroeconomic events, which no one's been thinking about for 15 years.
Yeah, very
Okay.
true.
And everyone's feeling like this is the way. It's like, I know people that built their entire businesses. They've never been through a downturn yet. And they think it's going to go forever. But I would say maybe having several verticals, and it doesn't necessarily think about government related industries, right? Because they're so regulated, but it doesn't have to be the defense contractors. There's so many businesses we can deal with that are 1 or 2 levels down that are just like our customers now, except they now have to meet certain standards, and you're getting the help that Phyllis talked about, which is a third party driving them. So if we're ahead on things like CMMC, that creates a huge opportunity. And I think, as I mentioned, once you get good at it with 20% of your base, you're going to bring those same standards and that culture to all of your customers. They're all going to level up, Andrew.
Yeah, very good point.
I think that's interesting that you say to look at different verticals, because oftentimes when I meet MSPs, they try to specialize in one, right? Because then they understand their customer, they understand what regulatory requirements they have to meet, and it's easy for them to kind of like get going and
yeah,
services.
And that's okay. I know people that are in financial services, like there's an example, great vertical, until there's a meltdown, financial meltdown.
Right.
Until Lehman Brothers goes out of business, and now which again, no one's thinking about because of the economy for so long. But I would think about that. I have a guy who his vertical is hotels, really difficult during the pandemic.
Right.
So you got to consider things that just because they haven't happened,
Gary, just quick question on, because you mentioned macroeconomics and I love talking about it. What about higher for longer? I mean, we haven't really had inflation, rising. We've had the Fed pushing deflation narrative and cutting interest rates for so long, but now potentially in a box, could that impact MSPs? Could it impact business? Just love your viewpoint on it.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more, not less inflation. It would be my, macroeconomics is a little hobby of mine. And what I tell our peer members is, we don't know what's going to happen, but think about a downturn, think about some inflation. Have you talked to all your customers? How, if we had another bout of inflation, what does it mean to them? Like what risk, what opportunities? Because it does both for different types of businesses. And I would say just having more awareness into those kind of things, Andrew, is important.
I got to believe having cash on hand is really important, right, Gary? You don't want to be in a leveraged situation with rising interest rates. Fair?
Yep, absolutely.
Got it. Do you see in 2025 the role of customer relationships changing? And if so, how should MSPs approach it? Whether it's, hey, historically, I know you used to joke around of VCIO and Captain Obvious, but now we have VCSOs. But is it as simple as we need to be up higher in the food chain? Give us some thoughts.
Higher and more strategic. Almost every opportunity that we talked about today is strategic to an SMB or an MME, mid-market enterprise, right? So if we are not able, this is the most important thing you can do in 2025, is to get higher level relationships, make them more strategic, understand not just the technology, but the business of every one of your customers. Everything else you do, everything else you build operationally, security-wise, should be to put you in a position to level up that relationship, all the answers. And I'm talking about customer relationship from a strategy, not a CSAT. I don't care if my customers like me as much as if they listen to me and if I understand their business, because the roadmap forward lies there. And if that's not where you are with every customer, you don't have a chance of making the right decisions or doing the right things, Andrew.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, you know, our keynote speaker for 2025 Right at Boom this year is Brent Adamson, who is the Challenger Sale author coming out with his latest book. But it just made me think about, Gary, something that was so, you know, I thought so important he laid out in the Challenger Sale, which was the best sales reps weren't the ones that were liked by their customers and prospects. It was the ones that challenged them and made them think and created friction. It wasn't a bad thing. We see it as a bad thing, creating friction in the sales process, and it's not necessarily, is it?
No, not at all. As long as you know how to do it respectfully, it's one of the main tools you have to develop respect. When a customer knows you're willing to push back and disagree vehemently, that's when they trust you.
Yeah.
Not when you say yes to everything. So I know you have one more question to me, and I want to make sure we have time for it because it's the most important question.
Yeah. Well, here it is. It's like I'll read it because I thought about it, and so I just want to read it out. Looking ahead, what is the one key piece of advice you'd give MSPs who are serious about thriving in the next 5 years? What should they be doing right now, you know, to level themselves up for success?
I'm going to give you 3 bullets. One, you know what I got to say. Join an industry peer group.
Yeah.
I don't know how you're not in one. It doesn't have to be this one. Okay. Yeah. We'd love to have you, but it's fine. It's like, but I think right now with everything we talked about, you don't want to be alone. Number 2, like commit to the entire planning process that I've laid out, the entire one. Make it your point to be better at it this year than ever before. And number 3, and I couldn't have given you this advice 5 years ago or 6 years ago, Andrew, but I'm really having a lot of conversations with our peer members about this. Mm-hmm. Remember that life is an optimization problem and business that has 3 components: money, time, and health. And most of the time, we don't have all 3 of them at the same time. So what I mean by that is the reason we have a career, whether we're a business owner or we're an employee, is because we want to have something we care about and are passionate about, and we want to create money, right? We want to earn. So that we can do things and have experiences in our lives and choices in our lives. And sometimes to get that, we sacrifice, you know, all of our time or our health. And it's really hard to have, you know, a balance. I would say in my life, I mainly sacrificed time. I had my business and I had my family, and I didn't have much other time for things. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I try to live a healthy lifestyle, but hobbies, those type of things. And, you know, like the advice I give to my kids now is much different. Like they're in their 30s, 20s and 30s. I don't want them to save every penny right now. I want them, while they have time and they have health, I want them to enjoy some experiences while they're planning, you know, for their future. So zooming out from all of this, all the security, all the business planning, ultimately what I say is I thought I was going to be in the MSP coaching business, but it turns out it's not. Helping people build an MSP is a better MSP is not my goal. It is a result. The goal is to help leaders and their teams master this optimization problem so that they can maximize their life. Does that, are you with me on that? And I think perspective will keep you from going too far in either direction, which is spending everything you have and being reckless with no choices for the future, or just working and being a miser and saving everything for the future, which was my starting point because my parents grew up in a depression. Like it's literally genetically in me.
Right.
And understanding, but just the concept of thinking about time, money, and health as 3 levers. And in your life, that's the levers. And everything else we talked about today is in the context of that. That's the most important thing I've learned in life.
Awesome perfect. And on the nose at 2 p.m. Eastern. Great advice today, Gary. Really appreciate it. And for everyone out there, please feel free to share this. I'm really glad you all showed up today to hear Gary's wisdom. Gary was, again, thanks so much for sharing it. Eric, thanks for filling in.
Of course.
It's always great to see you.
Thanks for having me.